Hello and welcome to Maya Foundations Workshop Week 4 bonus video. This week we'll be discussing a modification of the global illumination technique shown in Project Video 1. This will be adding a caustic effects to this discussed technique and it will be useful for scenes with glass or liquid objects. We'll start this video off with a review of the standard global illumination technique, which involves using global illumination and final gathering in a mental ray rendering. We'll move on to an overview of the mental ray's caustics and then show how to combine both effects effectively within your scene. We will then wrap up with a conclusion of this technique. The global illumination technique shown in Project Video 1 starts with setting up the physical sun and sky system within Mental Ray, which will bring in this directional lighting representing the sun. You then get the angle of that light correct by doing IPR renders with only the physical skeleton of the building. Once that's set up, you would then set up the area light through the window that will be replicating the indirect sunlight. But since this is all windows, I need a large one, but usually it's the exact same size as your window. Once the area light is built, you're gonna turn on use as a light shape and make it visible so that you can then put a portal light through the area light. So now I have the portal light selected. I can come down to within the area light to the custom shaders and link the portal light to the light shader and the photon emitter. Make sure the light illuminates by default is turned on. And for global illumination, you're going to want to turn on emit photons, and now this photon color will be driven by the photon emitter, which will be the sky. And within the render settings, you're going to want to turn on global ray tracing first, then global illumination. Start with a low accuracy. And you can also raise the radius up just a little bit. You'll actually see the dots from the where the photons are hitting. And then on low settings with just global illumination on, you're going to do another test render. Now you can see the individual photons actually coming in, and you can see their distribution, how they'll light the inside of the room and the outer room. Then you can start tweaking with the photon intensity and the exponent. And when you're actually ready to do a final rendering, you'll actually pump up these global illumination photons to get a much smoother result. And you will also play with the accuracy, and you can also move this radius back down to 0 when you're ready to render it. Then, when you're happy with the lighting results, you will save out, you'll put a name on the photon map and unclick this rebuild photon map so that it keeps it and you don't actually have to build it again. And then you'll move on to final gathering. Do a low setting to smooth out the light more around. Get your settings just right, and if you want to, you can also name it, rebuild the map off, and that way you can still tweak other options and render without having to always rebuild the photon map and the final gather map. And here's a rendering of just the direct lighting and the area light using the global illumination. So you can see the direct lighting ends around here, and the global illumination has spread out the lighting more throughout the room, and then some final gather would actually spread it everywhere. Now onto the caustics overview. So caustics is how light bends and refracts through glass or liquid surfaces, creating a kind of that dancey, wavy reflections and specular highlights. So to begin with, I brought in my glass table that's going to have the caustics done onto them, and you need a material that has an index of refraction set up on it. So I'm using a dielectric material. It's a mental ray material. It's the simplest material to use to get caustics. And the index of refraction for glass is 1.5, and I just did a light blue. Now, I still have my sun and sky in here, but I added some spotlights that are turned off, zero intensity. I'm sorry, they're turned on, but they have zero intensity. But under caustics and global illumination, I turned on emit photons, and in the render settings, you'll have to turn on ray tracing and caustics. And under caustics, the basic setting is 100 for accuracy, which is fine. Again, you can put the radius up just a little bit just to start with, just to see the actual individual photons a little easier. And if you click on a light again now, that you'll see that the caustic photons is opened up. And you start with 10,000 is a nice simple number to run the first test simulation on. So once I have that set up, you do a test rendering to see how the initial caustics will lay out in the scene, and from there you can start to play with the values to get much more improved look. Here you can see the test render has really shown the nice caustics come out onto the floor, and you can see them bouncing up on the walls. And you can see because the radius was a 0.1, you can actually see the individual caustics. So this will be nice to spread some light around and break it up to interesting patterns. And then to improve upon these settings, you'd play with the photon intensity, the exponent, and then when you're really ready for a final rendering, you pump up these caustic photons to get a much cleaner picture. And this radius would be back down to 0. And you could also pump up this accuracy. Now we're going to combine both the global illumination with the caustic effects. So you have the direct sunlight coming in, you have the area light turned on, that will have the global illumination adding the indirect lighting, along with the caustics allowing the play of refractions, refractions, and specular lighting upon the floor of the glass table. So this modified technique starts the same as the old technique. I'm going to hide my caustic lights. I'm just going to bring back my global illumination lighting. And under render settings, make sure all you have on, final gathering off, caustics off, just global illumination. Then go through the initial global illumination technique to find the most appropriate settings for your scene. And when that's done, do not go on to the final gathering. Instead, turn off global illumination, hide your global illumination light, bring back your caustic lights, and now turn on caustics and go through the caustic process of fine-tuning those settings until you get the caustic set just right. Then you'll turn on both global illumination, bring back your global illumination light, and now you have both caustic lighting, the direct lighting, and the global illumination lighting in the room, along with global illumination turned on and caustics turned on. Now here, in both the global illumination and caustics are going to be using the same photon map. They're both using the same photon technique. So you're going to put a name in for the photon map, both GI and caustics, and then render out the scene. On everything else can be low settings, but have your global illumination, your caustics set up to the highest settings that you want for those effects, because when you render this, you're going to build this photon map out. When it's done rendering, you're going to rebuild the photon map, so you only have to spend the time building out that photon map once for both global illumination caustics. Then you can move on to the next stage of final gathering. So this is what it might look like with both the global illumination and the caustics playing out. So you can see here that with the global illumination, it really filled out the room, but there are some artifacts that you're going to have to get rid of with final gathering. So you see here, like this wall, this blue turns to a different shade of blue in this area. And also you can see those patterns of white and dark that can be cleaned up with final gather, and especially these larger artifacts that'll be noticeable. Now, you have to be careful with final gather because final gather works to smooth out the lighting discrepancies in a scene, which is great for global illumination when you have these kind of artifacts here, but it will also start cleaning up these nice caustic patterns on the floor, because all caustic patterns are is breaking up of the light. And final gather will go in and see, oh, this is like a dark splotchy area, and here it's more light around here, so it might blend the two. Here this got this nice sharp difference of the light pattern. It might start to blend this out. So this is a big part of this new modified technique, is that final gather has to be done with a light touch. It has to both remove the global illumination artifacts without destroying the caustics too much. So a good trick when doing final gathering is to leave the point interpolation low. You might even I found that the default settings actually worked better than a higher setting, because it cleaned up my caustics too much. So here you can see the result of a final gathering with a low point interpolation. You can see that the caustics are still there. They got blurred just slightly, but they're still definable, and you can see those big color artifacts that we were having from global illumination got cleaned up quite a bit too. So here again, you can see this big blue area. It's very noticeable, and the interplay of the light and dark areas all around each other. You see this sphere here, and if I click back to the other one, the new one with the final gathering, you can see it's been cleaned up for the most part, and the caustics still remain, although you can see that they've been blurred just ever so slightly. So once you have your final gathering set to the level that is balanced between the global illumination and caustics, you can also save out your final gathering map and turn rebuild to off, and you can also move on to any other tweaks you need while all your maps are built and saved out, your photon map and your final gathering map. And then you can do your final render. If you have a scene that has glass or liquid objects in it, and you're using the global illumination lighting technique shown in the project videos, and you'd like to add some caustics to really spruce up the scene a little bit, you can accommodate for both, and they will both be built into the same photon map, but you will need to be careful with using the final gathering to smooth out your lighting at the end, because again, you're going to want to smooth out your global illumination artifacts a little bit with minimal effect on your caustics. So using caustics in combination with global illumination can add a really nice touch in your scene, especially if you have glass or liquid objects, but you do need to be careful when applying the final gathering at the end.